The farmhouse burned like a beacon against the night, flames licking skyward, painting the darkness in flickering shades of rage and despair. Smoke billowed thick and black, choking out the starlight. He stood silhouetted against the inferno, the glow reflecting in hollow, haunted eyes. This wasn't just wood and memories turning to ash. It was a family's legacy consumed by greed, betrayal, and a bitter promise left unspoken. The crackling fire echoed louder than gunfire. Each snapping ember another nail hammered into a coffin of dreams. He clenched his fists, feeling the heat scorch his knuckles, welcoming the pain. The land beneath his feet, soil he'd tilled with hope, watered with sweat, stained now with loss, seemed to whisper one truth above the chaos. Some fires don't just burn, they ignite wars of redemption, battles fought quietly in the soul, until all that's left is vengeance or forgiveness. Tonight, a choice had to be made. Garrett Dawson stood on the creaking wooden porch of the farmhouse he had inherited, gazing out at miles of flat farmland under a harsh midday sun. At 38, he had already lived through more trials than many men face in a lifetime, and especially since losing his wife, Emily, 4 years prior in a car accident that left him wrestling with grief and the day-to-day burdens of maintaining a fifth-generation family farm. The paint on the house had begun to peel, and the stable out back sat in need of repairs he could scarcely afford. Stacks of overdue notices waited on the kitchen table, but he took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus on the immediate tasks: feeding the chickens, checking the irrigation lines, and driving into the small town of Fairview for a routine supply run. That morning, the bank had left yet another voicemail urging him to schedule a final discussion regarding his outstanding loan, a phrase that sank like a stone in his gut. He tried not to dwell on it. If he could just get through the month, maybe some miracle would keep the farm afloat. He climbed into his trusty old pickup truck, its green paint faded and scratched, the original color barely discernible. Driving the few dusty miles into town, Garrett passed the same fields he had known since childhood. Rows of corn, soybeans, and a small patch of experimental produce dotted the landscape, each representing his latest attempt to find a more profitable niche. A glimmer of hope fluttered in him whenever he thought about these specialty crops. If only the bank would give him a little more time, he believed he could turn things around. Arriving at Gibson's Gas and Go, the only fueling station within 20 miles, Garrett parked near the rusted air pump. He needed to top off a leaky tire, one of the many small repairs that never ended. Today, the station was unusually empty. Only one other car was pulled off to the side, a sleek black sedan with out-of-state plates. He was hooking up the air hose when he heard a frustrated sigh from behind the sedan's open hood. Stepping away from his truck, he approached. There, in designer boots that looked out of place on a dusty roadside, stood a woman about his age, squinting at the engine as if looking for a hidden switch. She had dark hair pulled neatly back, and her expression was a mix of annoyance and embarrassment. "Car trouble?" Garrett asked politely, making sure his voice carried warmth rather than intrusion. She glanced up, relieved yet guarded, and nodded. "Yes, I think the battery died. I pulled over to check my phone, and then the car just refused to start. I'm Andrea, by the way." "Garrett," he returned with a reassuring half-smile. "I've got jumper cables in my truck. We can try giving you a boost." He took a moment to notice how travel-worn she looked, like someone who had been driving with no particular destination in mind. Her trunk was stacked with multiple suitcases. It didn't look like your typical quick-trip baggage. They maneuvered their vehicles so he could attach the cables. When the sedan roared back to life, Andrea exhaled a relieved laugh. "Thank you," she said. "You saved me from a long afternoon waiting for a tow." Then she glanced at Garrett's truck, noticing the stenciled Dawson family farm. "Is there some place to eat around here?" "Mr. Dawson, I'd like to repay the favor with dinner, or at least a cup of coffee." Garrett's first instinct was to say no. There were fences to mend, the bank to call, the animals to feed, but something about her tone felt earnest. "There's a little diner down the road," he replied. "It's no five-star place, but the food's honest. You're welcome to follow me." In paragraph 2, 545 words. Fairview Diner was a squat, unassuming building with chipped red paint, but inside it held a warmth that people around these parts cherished. Booths of faded vinyl lined the walls, and framed photos of local fair-winning livestock were interspersed with old newspaper clippings featuring the diner's grand opening decades ago. When Garrett and Andrea walked in and the handful of patrons glanced up out of quiet curiosity, an outsider in fancy boots in a sleek sedan always attracted attention in a small town. They slid into a booth near the window, the vinyl seat squeaking under Garrett's weight. Andrea studied the laminated menu with an unexpected air of fascination, as if searching for hidden culinary treasures. He noticed her eyes linger on phrases like homemade biscuits and gravy and farm-fresh eggs. It was a far cry from a big city cuisine, but she looked intrigued rather than disappointed. Over thick ceramic mugs of coffee, Garrett discovered that Andrea's car had California plates for a reason. "I've been driving cross-country," she said, blowing gently on her mug. No fixed schedule, no set route. She didn't elaborate on why, but a subtle sadness beneath her polite smile hinted at something deeper she might be running from. When the food arrived, Andrea took an unhurried bite of scrambled eggs and closed her eyes momentarily, savoring it like a connoisseur tasting a high-priced delicacy. Garrett found it peculiar that simple diner eggs brought her so much satisfaction. She opened her eyes and smiled. "This tastes like real food, like someone cared enough to cook it right, not just to get it done." Garrett shrugged. "Here, we just call it home cooking. Nothing fancy, but it's honest, and it'll fill you up." For a while, they ate in a companionable quiet, punctuated by the hum of conversation around them. Andrea eventually asked about Dawson Family Farm, pointing to the faintly visible logo on Garrett's truck parked outside. He explained how the farm had been in his family for generations, how they had once thrived on milk cows and row crops, and how life turned harder after his father's passing. He deliberately didn't mention his wife's accident or the financial noose tightening around him. He barely knew this woman. Andrea listened intently, occasionally nodding. She asked more questions about the land, the type of seeds he planted, and whether he'd considered growing anything unique like heirloom vegetables or specialty produce. Garrett found her curiosity odd but refreshing. He wasn't used to city folk being so interested in the nuts and bolts of farming. After the plates were cleared, Andrea insisted on paying the bill. Garrett saw in her eyes that she wasn't taking no for an answer. Outside, the late afternoon sun hung low, bathing the dusty main street in a soft gold glow. Neither seemed ready to part ways just yet. "I'm probably going to be stuck around here another day or two," Andrea said. The car battery might need more than just a jump. Any decent motel around? Garrett hesitated, recalling the single motel in Fairview that was clean but perpetually booked by traveling nurses or visiting relatives. Then he remembered the cabin. "Well," he began slowly, "I've got a small cabin back on my property. We usually rent it out for weekend getaways. It's empty this week. Not much, but it's private. If you don't mind quiet nights and farmland views, it might suit you better than the motel." Andrea's shoulders relaxed in gratitude. "That sounds perfect. Actually, I'd love to see more of this place." Isham, paragraph 3, 540 words. Garrett wasn't certain why he had offered the cabin, but something about Andrea's gentle sincerity made it feel right. She followed him in her sedan, carefully avoiding potholes on the narrow country road. After nearly 10 minutes of passing fields of corn and soybeans, they reached a long gravel driveway marked by a rusted sign that read Dawson Family Farm. The farmhouse itself was a two-story structure with peeling white paint. Sitting at the end of the drive amidst a few storage sheds in an aging barn, off to the side, near a patch of trees, stood a modest log-style cabin. It was no luxury chalet, just a simple, two-room structure with a tiny porch. Yet, framed by the setting sun, it offered a serene view of the gently rolling fields. Garrett unlocked the cabin and switched on a single overhead light. Warm yellow illumination revealed a small living area with a kitchenette in the corner, a wood table, and shelves stocked with mismatched dishes. A doorway led to a compact bedroom, and a tiny bathroom connected at the back. Despite its simplicity, everything was neat and smelled faintly of pine. Andrea stepped inside, taking in the rustic atmosphere with an appreciative nod. "This is cozy," she said, setting her suitcase near the couch. "I wasn't expecting anything so welcoming." Garrett gave a modest shrug. "Folks rent it from time to time for a country retreat. My mom, Helen, fixes it up between guests, makes sure there's fresh towels and a few basic groceries. There's some bread, eggs, and probably some vegetables in the fridge from the garden. If you need more, the general store is a short drive back into town." Andrea peeked into the small fridge, where she found indeed a carton of eggs, a jug of milk, and fresh tomatoes. "Thank you." "This is more than enough," she said, turning to Garrett with a grateful look. "I know this is unusual for you, a complete stranger just showing up. I promise I won't be any trouble." Before Garrett could respond, he heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Stepping outside, he spotted a police SUV pulling up. Immediately, he recognized the driver, his younger cousin, Deputy Lisa Dawson. She climbed out, tipping her hat in greeting. "Hey, Garrett, we got a call from the diner. Some folks said there was a fancy car with California plates. I just wanted to be sure everything's okay." Garrett smiled reassuringly. "All good, Lisa. Andrea here just needed a place to stay while her car battery situation gets sorted. She'll be renting the cabin for a couple days." Lisa nodded, peering past Garrett to where Andrea stood in the cabin doorway. "Welcome to Fairview, ma'am. Let me know if you need anything. It's a safe town, but we keep an eye out for outsiders. No offense." Andrea took no offense at all. She actually smiled and said, "I appreciate the concern, Deputy. I'm just hoping to rest for a bit and maybe see some of the sights around here." Lisa tipped her hat again, then turned back to Garrett with a pointed look that only family can give. As if to say, "You sure about this?" Garrett nodded slightly, wordlessly assuring her all was fine. Satisfied, Lisa returned to her SUV and rumbled off into the fading daylight. After she was gone, Garrett looked at Andrea. Small town. He apologized with a half smile. News travels fast. Shim. Paragraph 4, 550 words. That night, Garrett drove back to the farmhouse. The windows were dark except for a single lamp in the living room, where his mother, Helen, waited with a pot of chamomile tea. The lines on her face had deepened over the years, but her posture remained proud. She was in her early 60s, still spry, despite mild arthritis. As Garrett entered, she fixed him with a curious gaze. "I heard from Lisa you brought a stranger to the cabin," Helen said by way of greeting. She poured Garrett a mug of tea and set it on the wooden coffee table. "You want to tell me what that's about?" Garrett sank into the old recliner that had belonged to his father. "She's from California. Passing through. Car battery died. I offered her a place to stay," he explained, rubbing his temples. "She seemed honest enough." "Ma," Helen nodded, and her stern expression softened. "I trust your judgment. Just be careful. The last thing you need right now is more complications." She gestured to the manila envelope on the table. "Bank called again. They're pushing for that final meeting." A heaviness settled in Garrett's chest. He lifted the envelope, which contained the same story as always: deadlines, default notices, all culminating in the threat that if he couldn't produce the money in 30 days, they'd move ahead with foreclosure. Helen put a comforting hand on his shoulder. "I know it's tough," she said gently, "but don't lose hope. Couldn't you reach out to some investor or government program? See if they can help with your idea for specialty crops," he sighed. "I tried a few times. My credit's poor. The collateral is practically worthless to them. And most are not interested in small operations. They want big-scale farms or existing brand recognition. We don't have either." Helen pursed her lips in dismay, but said nothing more. Silence enveloped them. The floorboards creaked as a gentle breeze from an open window rustled the yellowed curtains. Garrett's thoughts drifted to Andrea, the curious traveler. There was something about her, an unspoken sadness, yet a quiet determination. He couldn't put his finger on why he felt that. All he knew was that her presence felt strangely reassuring, a distraction from his daily struggles. He retired to his bedroom, opening the window to let in the cool night air. The farm was mostly silent except for the faint hum of cicadas. Unable to sleep, He found himself staring at the ceiling, the swirl of finances and farmland jockeying for space with fleeting images of Andrea's thoughtful eyes and the way she seemed so captivated by a simple plate of diner eggs. Eventually, fatigue took over. At dawn, he woke to the smell of bacon, and Helen was cooking a hearty breakfast. After they ate, he swung by the cabin to check on Andrea. She answered the door, half yawning, wearing a casual sweater and jeans. "Morning," she greeted. "I was thinking of exploring the farm, if that's okay. Maybe I can help out." Garrett blinked, surprised but touched by the offer. Few outsiders expressed genuine interest in the farm work. Sure, he said. "Got a bit of fence repair to handle, and you're welcome to poke around." Andrea grinned, grabbed a pair of boots she'd found in the cabin closet leftovers from a previous guest, and stepped out into the early sunlight, ready to see a slice of country life up close. Paragraph 5, 545 words. As Garrett took Andrea around the main fields, the morning dew still clung to the rows of corn and soybeans. She listened as he explained the challenges of crop rotations, unpredictable weather, and the shrinking profit margins for small family farms. He spoke candidly about how he'd tried to introduce specialty crops, heirloom tomatoes, peppers, even a small patch of lavender to see if direct-to-consumer sales might help. Andrea asked detailed questions that caught Garrett off guard. How do you maintain soil balance for these experimental crops? Do you rotate them with your soybeans? Or is it a separate plot? He paused, blinking. Separate. I don't want the chemicals I use on soy contaminating the heirloom plots. Those customers expect organic or near-organic standards. She nodded, genuinely interested. Makes sense. Have you thought about linking up with local restaurants? The bigger cities might pay premium for high-quality, local produce. Garrett shrugged, tried emailing a few chefs in the state's capital. Never heard back. Most prefer large distributors. Less hassle. He paused. You seem to know a lot about the restaurant business. Andrea's eyes flickered with a hint of something unease. Perhaps, I've dabbled in the food world, she replied vaguely, before quickly redirecting him to another question about his irrigation systems. They moved on to the orchard-like area behind the barn, where a few old apple trees stood. Over the years, the orchard had dwindled as disease and neglect took their toll. He motioned to the sagging barn adjacent to the orchard. That used to be for dairy cows, decades back. Now it's mostly storage. She tilted her head, staring at the structure. Beautiful bones, though. Seems like it could be fixed up. Garrett chuckled ruefully. I don't have the money or time to fix up anything these days. They spent the next hour patching a section of broken fence near a drainage ditch. Andrea wasn't particularly skilled at hammering nails, but she tried, managing to keep pace enough to be helpful. Their conversation wove between light banter and serious topics. Garrett found himself enjoying the company more than he had expected. When they wrapped up, Andrea asked if there was anywhere in town to buy fresh groceries. I'd love to cook you dinner tonight. Something to thank you for letting me stay. Garrett hesitated. He rarely let anyone else cook in his kitchen. Not since Emily's passing. But the invitation felt sincere and might lighten the mood. There's a small general store, plus a weekly farmer's market if you catch it on Wednesdays. Andrea checked her watch. Today's Wednesday, she noted, eyes brightening. He nodded. All right, let's go to Fairview Market. But it's not exactly a big affair, just a handful of stalls. Don't expect too much. She responded with a smile that was both warm and tinged with anticipation, as if the smallest local market might be a treasure trove. Garrett loaded her into his truck again, and they set off toward the rickety stalls where local growers gathered once a week to sell produce, homemade jams, and the occasional baked goods. As they bumped along the dirt road, the tension Garrett usually felt about the farm's future seemed to recede, replaced by a small spark of optimism that, for once, he wasn't facing everything alone. So, Paragraph 6, 550 words. The Fairview Farmers Market consisted of no more than a dozen stalls lined up along a side street near the old grain co-op. A bustling hub it was not, yet Andrea bounded out of Garrett's truck with genuine excitement. She strolled from stall to stall, her eyes lighting up at baskets of heirloom tomatoes, jars of honey, and fresh goat cheese from a local dairy. Garrett followed behind, feeling oddly proud of his community. They stopped at Mrs. Barlow's produce stand first, where an assortment of early season greens and summer vegetables was displayed. Andrea held up a vibrant cluster of rainbow chard. Beautiful, she murmured, inspecting the leaves before placing them in a tote bag she'd borrowed from the cabin. Mrs. Barlow, an older woman with a weathered face, recognized Garrett immediately, greeting him by name. She cast a curious glance at Andrea but said nothing aside from a friendly, "Y'all enjoy your day." A few stalls down, they encountered local beekeeper Royce Holden, who boasted raw wildflower honey in glass jars that glimmered under the sun. Andrea sampled a small spoonful and closed her eyes, savoring the sweetness as though it were liquid gold. Garrett found himself strangely moved by how deeply she seemed to appreciate every small taste. It was reminiscent of how Emily used to find magic in everyday things: a perfectly ripe tomato, the first bloom of spring. As they made their way toward a bread stall, they bumped into a tall man in dark jeans and a crisp collared shirt. His face registered instant recognition when he saw Andrea. "Andrea Park," he said, voice edged with disbelief. Garrett sensed tension in the air as Andrea stiffened. "Callum Gray," Andrea replied, exhaling slowly. "What are you doing here? I might ask you the same," he retorted, ignoring Garrett's presence. "I've been looking everywhere for you. You stop answering calls, vanish into thin air, and now I find you at a tiny farmer's market in the middle of nowhere." Andrea forced a tight smile, then turned to Garrett, her expression apologetic. "Garrett, this is an old friend. Callum used to handle some business matters for me." Callum looked Garrett up and down, eyeing the worn flannel shirt, the dusty jeans. "Right. So what's the plan?" "Andrea, you can't hide out here forever. The network's calling me. Your staff is in limbo, and your brand enough." Andrea cut him off, her cheeks flushing with anger and embarrassment. "I told you I needed time away, time to think. So this is how you're spending it." Touring farm stands, he gave a dismissive sniff. "You have real obligations back home." Garrett decided to clear his throat, stepping in with a calm but firm tone. "Sir, Andrea is a guest on my farm. If you have business with her, maybe you should speak privately." Callum glared but conceded with a shrug. He lowered his voice, leaning toward Andrea. "Look, I'll give you a couple more days max. We can't stall the investors or the PR fiasco you left behind. Figure out whatever it is you're doing, then come back and fix it." Andrea said nothing, her jaw clenched. Callum spun on his heel and strode off, leaving the air charged with a heaviness that made Garrett's stomach twist. After a moment, Andrea forced a pained smile and turned back to the bread stall. "Let's get some sourdough," she whispered, trying to regain composure. "I promised to cook dinner, remember?" Paragraph 7, 540 words. Garrett waited until they got back to the truck with a bag full of produce and bread before quietly asking, "Everything all right?" That man seemed intense. He tried not to sound prying, but his concern was genuine. Andrea exhaled, resting her head briefly on the seat's headrest. "That was Callum Gray. He used to be my manager of sorts." She chose her words carefully, then offered a rueful laugh. "There's a reason I ended up in Fairview. I needed distance from a life that had gotten way out of control." It dawned on Garrett that Andrea might be more than just a casual food world dabbler. Yet, a wave of sympathy rose in him. He saw the pain flickering behind her eyes. "If you'd rather not talk about it." She shook her head. "No, I owe you some explanation. Well, I was a celebrity chef, had a TV show, multiple restaurant ventures. It might sound glamorous, but the deeper I got, the more I felt like a puppet dancing for investors, critics, and a never-ending cycle of demands. It all got worse when," her voice caught for a moment, "when my fiancé, who was also my business partner, passed away last year. After that, everything seemed meaningless. I kept going out of obligation, then I just snapped. Garrett's mind whirled. A famous chef, here in Fairview, cooking him dinner. He might have chuckled if her eyes hadn't been so sad. "I'm sorry about your fiancé," he offered softly. She pressed her lips into a thin line, nodding in appreciation. "Thank you, but that's not your burden." Anyway, I had to step back and figure out whether I even love cooking anymore. So I packed my bags, started driving east, and here I am. Garrett reached over to place a reassuring hand on her forearm. "Hey, sometimes it takes leaving to see what we really need. I get it. I lost my wife a few years ago and, well, I still haven't fully moved on. But the farm keeps me grounded. I can see how cooking might be the same for you." They shared a moment of quiet, a mutual understanding of grief. Then Andrea straightened. "Let's go back to that cabin. I'll cook you a meal. No cameras, no critics, no fancy plating, just good food." Once they reached the farm, Andrea asked Garrett to let her be in charge of the kitchen. He relented with a gentle smile, directing her inside and showing her where pots and pans were stored. Meanwhile, he retreated to the front porch, letting the chatter of farmland accompany him wind in the tall grass, distant clucks from chickens, and the steady hum of evening insects. After about an hour, Andrea stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "Dinner's ready," she announced, her voice carrying a softer, more peaceful tone. Garrett joined her at the small dining table, where she had laid out a spread roasted rainbow chard with goat cheese, freshly sliced tomatoes drizzled with Royce Holden's honey, and thick slices of sourdough. The simple meal looked like a banquet in the golden lamplight. Garrett took a bite of the honey-drizzled tomato and felt his eyes widen. It was bright, sweet, and honest, much like the woman who made it. Into Paragraph 8, 545 words. While the plates were still warm and the conversation lingering, the cabin's door swung open to reveal Helen Dawson, Garrett's mother. In a fluster, she apologized. I knocked, but no one answered. The door was ajar, so I didn't realize we had company. Garrett rose, pulling out a spare chair. "Ma, this is Andrea Park. She's the guest I mentioned. Andrea, this is my mother. Helen." Andrea stood politely, extending her hand. Helen took it, casting a quick, inquisitive glance at the table. "Well, you've certainly whipped up quite a spread. Smells divine." Andrea smiled, a bit shyly. "I hope you'll join us. There's plenty." That was all the invitation Helen needed. She settled in, helping herself to some charred and honey-laced tomatoes. Soon, the three of them were immersed in conversation about the farmland's history and the ups and downs of the Dawson family. Andrea listened intently to Helen's stories of raising Garrett and working alongside her late husband. When the meal finished, Helen dabbed her lips with a napkin, eyes sparkling. "Andrea, that was excellent. You've a real talent." Andrea's cheeks turned faintly pink. She confessed softly, "Cooking like this, it's what I needed. It reminds me of why I fell in love with food in the first place." Helen nodded in understanding, though she had no inkling of Andrea's full backstory. She patted Garrett's shoulder. "I came here, actually, to tell you that the bank called again, wanting to finalize your meeting. But maybe this is a conversation for later." Andrea's gaze darted from Helen to Garrett, clearly noticing the weight in the older woman's voice. With a determined set to his jaw, Garrett stood. "I'll walk you to the door, Ma." Stepping outside into the cool night, Garrett took a deep breath and asked quietly, "They say anything different or new?" Helen shook her head. "Just another reminder about the 30 days. Dear, thought you should know. They don't seem likely to grant any more extensions." She squeezed his hand. "If you need me, I'm here." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "Thanks. Ma, good night." Returning inside, he found Andrea quietly clearing the table. She looked up, concern etched on her features. "Everything okay?" Garrett half shrugged. "Same story. Bank wants it as money. I've tried every angle: loans, partial sales, cutting down expenses. So far, not enough." Andrea set the dishes in the sink, drying her hands before turning to face him. "Is there anything else you can do? Any way to pivot the farm?" He sighed. I do have this dream of pivoting to specialty or organic crops, or maybe making a brand of local produce. Problem is, I don't have the capital or the connections. Not out here, anyway. Andrea pressed her lips together, thoughtful. Sometimes the best solutions come from unusual places. Have you ever considered turning the old barn into something that draws people in, like an event space or farm-to-table dinners? Garrett raised his brows. That's more a city thing, isn't it? Could be, Andrea conceded, but you never know who's looking for an authentic farm experience. She paused, hesitating as if measuring whether to reveal more of herself. I, I might be able to help you think through it. It's sort of what I used to do, bring unique culinary experiences to places nobody thought possible. A glimmer of hope formed in Garrett's chest, though he wasn't sure if it was wise to trust so quickly. Then again, Andrea had shown sincerity at every turn. Let's talk in the morning, he said, voice steady, for tonight us. Just know that dinner was truly wonderful. Thank you. Paragraph 9, 540 words. Morning broke in streaks of pale gold, illuminating the dew-laden grass. Garrett, as always, woke before sunrise to handle farm chores. By the time he returned to the cabin for the promised discussion with Andrea, the day was already warming. Andrea had set out 2 mugs of coffee on the tiny porch table. She gestured for him to sit. He took a slow sip, savoring the dark brew. Not bad, he murmured, smiling. She had a knack for making even the simplest things taste special. Andrea folded her hands on the table. I've been thinking about your farm, how to keep it afloat. There's a growing interest in rural tourism, agritourism, or farm-to-table events. People want an authentic experience. You have this barn, you grow produce, you're good with your land. If you could convert that barn into a venue, you might attract paying visitors, maybe do weekend dinners or special events. Garrett nodded thoughtfully. I've heard of that, but it feels so far-fetched for me alone. Would it really work here? She shrugged. Why not? You're only an hour from a slightly bigger town, maybe 3 from the state capital. That's a day trip for plenty of folks. More importantly, you could also supply other restaurants if your produce is top-notch. And from what I've tasted, your land's got real potential. He tried to remain realistic, yet hope flickered in him. I guess capital is the problem. Barn renovations, new irrigation for specialty crops. The bank won't lend me another cent. Andrea let out a slow breath. Listen, it might be too soon to say this, but I do have some resources, or I did. Anyway, my name still carries weight in the culinary world, which means I might be able to bring in investors or at least create buzz. If we partnered up, I could help draw attention to your farm. I just need time to get my finances in order, too. Callum's not entirely wrong. I left behind a messy situation, but there's still opportunity. Garrett's gut reaction was to protest. He had always handled the farm alone, but desperation gnawed at him. He was out of time. Maybe it was foolish to distrust a woman who had proven nothing but kindness. Partnership, you say? He looked out toward the fields, imagining them bustling with heirloom vegetables and seasonal events. Would that mean you'd come out here regularly, oversee these dinners, or would I be on my own? Andrea's expression softened. I'd want to be hands-on. I can't stand the corporate life in the city. If we do this, I'd be here, helping to build something real, something that honors both our histories. She paused, lowering her eyes. And it's not just about saving you. It's about saving me, too. I need a reason to love cooking again. This might be that reason. Garrett inhaled slowly. He was torn between caution and the pressing fact that time was running out. We'd have to see the numbers, he said at last. I can't just leap without knowing the pala. And the bank's not about to give me a year to figure it out. Andrea reached across the small table, her hand brushing his. Then maybe we just start small, she suggested. A trial event, one special evening. I'll cook. We'll invite a handful of people. See how it feels. If it goes well, we decide if we can expand it. Garrett found himself nodding, a tiny spark of optimism lighting up his otherwise weary mind. All right, he agreed. Let's try. Paragraph 10, 550 words. By late afternoon, word had spread quietly through Fairview that something unique was happening at the Dawson farm. Garrett had made discreet calls to a few friends, mentioning that a guest chef wanted to put on a small dinner event. He asked them to invite any folks they thought might be interested, from local restaurant owners to curious townspeople. Andrea, for her part, dived into planning with an infectious energy that Garrett found both exciting and daunting. She persuaded Helen to let her use the Dawson family kitchen, which was bigger than the cabins, for prep work. With Helen's help, Andrea gathered fresh produce from the backyard garden, plump tomatoes, peppers, and basil. They collected eggs from the chicken coop for protein. Garrett sourced local pasture-raised poultry from a neighbor. Even the old orchard contributed a small basket of near-ripe apples. They set the date for that coming Saturday, merely 3 days away. Not enough time for formal invitations, but the short notice actually added to the mystique. Andrea insisted that the event remain small, an intimate test run. She scouted the old barn in the orchard, deciding they could temporarily string up lights and clear out just enough space for a communal table. The structure's wooden beams and rustic charm would be the backdrop. Garrett borrowed folding chairs from a local church, while a family friend lent them a long wooden table that had once graced community potlucks. Each day was a flurry of activity: cleaning the barn, setting up a makeshift kitchen, picking produce at dawn. Garrett felt a renewed sense of purpose, though the bank's ultimatum loomed in the back of his mind, urging him to see if this idea had any real future. As Saturday evening approached, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, threatening to soak the farm with rain just in time for the dinner. Garrett felt his anxiety spike, but Andrea remained undeterred. "We'll adapt," she said simply, looking up at the clouds. "We can move to your house if we have to." Fortune favored them. The storm passed to the north, leaving the skies vibrant with the pinks and purples of a post-rain sunset. By 7 o'clock, the barn was softly lit by string lights, flickering lanterns, and a few decorative candles. About a dozen guests arrived, some curious locals, a pair of small-town food bloggers, and 2 owners of local bistros who had been coaxed by Helen to come see something special. Andrea worked quickly but gracefully in the makeshift barn kitchen, assisted by Helen and occasionally Garrett. As dishes began to emerge, roasted vegetables, crispy chicken, fresh garden salad with tangy vinaigrette, gentle chatter filled the space. People smiled, complimenting the flavors, remarking on the barn's homey ambiance. Garrett found himself astonished at how seamlessly Andrea navigated the tasks. There was no frantic TV show pace, no cameras capturing her every move, just the quiet confidence of someone who truly loved every step of the process. Between plating courses, she would emerge, face flushed with satisfaction, to share a tidbit about where each ingredient came from. When the final dish, an apple cobbler laced with local honey, hit the table, the guests erupted into appreciative laughter and applause. Andrea briefly looked overwhelmed by emotion, her eyes glistening. Garrett couldn't help but feel moved, too. This was more than just a meal. It was an affirmation that the farm, and Andrea's passion, still had life left to give. Paragraph 11, 545 words. Once dessert was served, Andrea took a moment to step outside the barn, needing fresh air. Garrett followed, drawn by a quiet urge to see if she was all right. He found her leaning against a wooden post, gazing at the glowing windows of the barn and the silhouettes of people inside, laughing, chatting, savoring what she had prepared. She spoke softly without turning. "I haven't felt like this in a long time, Garrett. Usually at my restaurants or TV sets, I'm swarmed by cameras, critics. I have to prove something all the time. Tonight, it was just real." He nodded, stepping closer so that their shoulders nearly touched. "They loved your food, Andrea, and you didn't have to prove anything to them. You just had to be you." Andrea let out a small laugh. "Yeah, it reminded me of the early days cooking in tiny kitchens, learning from old family recipes." She paused, her voice catching. "I thought I'd lost that spark after my fiancé. James passed." The mention of her fiancé's name was the first time Garrett had heard it. A pang of empathy flashed through him. "I'm glad you found a piece of it again tonight," he said softly. Her eyes flickered with gratitude. Then she inhaled, as if bracing for a leap. "I know we talked about a trial event, but seeing tonight, it's got me thinking about something bigger. This could be a monthly or even weekly dinner series. People come from the surrounding towns. Maybe do tours of the farm, dine in the barn. You could charge enough to make a profit, especially if word spreads." Garrett tilted his head, letting himself imagine the possibility. If done right, it could be a real revenue stream. With Andrea's culinary expertise, maybe they could also supply restaurants, building a Dawson brand. He kept a cautious note, though. The barn needs a lot of work for repeated events, upgraded electricity, safety codes, better ventilation. That costs money we don't have. Andrea turned, facing him. "I have some funds in a personal account. If I can sort out the entanglements back in California, I'd invest. And I have connections investors who might see the charm of a farm-based venue." He studied her face, searching for any sign of doubt or hidden motive. "Why would you do that for me?" he asked quietly. Andrea managed a gentle smile. "It's not just for you, Garrett. I need a place that anchors me to what really matters, just like you do. Your farm can give me that. And in return, maybe I can help keep it alive." At that moment, the barn door swung open and Helen appeared, beckoning. "Hey, you two lovebirds, come back in. Folks want a toast to Andrea's cooking, and they're looking for the hostess." Andrea's cheeks flushed. Garrett rubbed the back of his neck in slight embarrassment. They weren't lovebirds, but the warmth they shared was undeniable. They exchanged a half smile before returning inside, where the clink of glasses and the hum of contented conversation embraced them like a warm wave. In the back of Garrett's mind, bank notices still loomed. But for now, he let himself revel in this small victory, a single evening that felt like a promise of something both hopeful and profound. Paragraph 12, 545 words. The following week was a whirlwind of both excitement and uncertainty. While Garrett wrestled with the pressing reality of bank deadlines 30 days, no extension, Andrea spent her days mapping out potential budgets, brainstorming how to refine the barn dinners, and calling old contacts who might be interested in the next big thing in farm-to-table experiences. One of those calls was with Callum Gray. Andrea paced around the porch on her phone, explaining her vision and gently insisting he hold off on any press releases until she could finalize details. From what Garrett overheard, Callum was skeptical. "You want to rebuild your career in some dusty old barn? This isn't what the sponsors want," he'd scoffed. Andrea calmly rebutted, describing the authenticity and sense of community. She ended the call looking drained but not defeated. Meanwhile, the success of the test dinner spread quickly through Fairview. Helen overheard chatter at the hair salon, and Garrett got multiple phone calls from acquaintances wanting to know, "When's the next barn dinner?" While this local interest was encouraging, Garrett knew they'd need a broader reach to generate the income required. It was a fragile hope, like a young plant that could still be snuffed out if conditions weren't perfect. Then came another twist. A letter arrived, hand-delivered by a bank representative. It included the official foreclosure timetable. If Garrett didn't pay the outstanding debt or refinance within 25 days, they would seize assets. That night, he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stark language. Andrea stood behind him, gently squeezing his shoulder. "I can't lose this place," he muttered, voice shaking. "My father, my grandfather, they built this with their hands. Emily and I always talked about raising children here." The sorrow in his voice echoed through the dimly lit room. Andrea slid into the chair beside him, her expression resolute. "Then let's not lose it. We need a real plan, a package to show investors or sponsors, something that'll get them to front us the money for renovations and expansions." Garrett exhaled heavily. "But that means contracts, business proposals, all kinds of legal stuff." She nodded. "I know. I've done it before. It's complicated, but not impossible. And if I'm part of it, we can pitch a relaunch of my brand combined with your heritage farm. A redemption story, people love that. But I have to warn you, It'll bring attention. Maybe cameras. Are you ready for that? He gazed around the farmhouse, the same walls that had watched generations of Dawsons come and go. The idea of turning his quiet existence into some kind of media attraction felt daunting, but so did losing everything. "I'll do what it takes," he said finally, voice trembling. "If it means saving the farm, I'll deal with cameras. I just don't want to become something I'm not." Andrea smiled softly, placing her hand over his. "That's the beauty of it. I don't want to be something I'm not either. So we'll make sure this project stays honest to the land and to us." Those words, simple as they were, buoyed Garrett like a lifeline. For the first time in a long while, it felt as though he wasn't carrying the burden of the farm alone. Paragraph 13, 545 words. With a renewed sense of urgency, the next few days turned into a blur of phone calls, site visits, and fervent brainstorming. Andrea sketched out a plan. They would host a showcase dinner in 4 weeks, a bigger event that might attract regional press, plus a few influential figures from the culinary world. The aim: generate investment to pay off the bank or at least secure a bridge loan. Garrett hammered away at barn repairs with help from a neighbor who was handy with carpentry. They replaced rotting boards, ensured the roof was patched, and cleared space for a more permanent kitchen setup. While he worked, Helen took on the role of coordinator, calling local artisans for decorative items, enlisting younger volunteers to help with painting and cleaning. The entire community seemed to catch wind of the vision and pitched in, some out of friendship, others out of curiosity. Andrea spent hours refining the menu, each dish designed to highlight the farm's produce. She also took calls from a local TV station, carefully dropping hints about a revival of authentic cooking happening at Dawson Farm. In her quiet moments, she told Garrett how strange it felt to be harnessing media for something she truly believed in, rather than letting it control her. Yet a sliver of doubt gnawed at Garrett. The bank's deadline approached swiftly, and all their efforts hinged on a single make-or-break event. He worked late into the nights, sore muscles and an aching heart reminding him how much he stood to lose. Andrea often joined him in the barn after finishing menu planning, carrying a thermos of coffee and a gentle smile. They'd share small pockets of quiet conversation about Emily's memory, about the fiancé Andrea had lost, about how life can twist you into knots, but also offer second chances. In one of those hushed nighttime talks, Andrea confided, "His name was James. We built the restaurants together. He was the dreamer. I was the chef. When he died, I lost my reason to push forward. After that, the restaurants were no longer a labor of love, just a duty. I kept them going until I couldn't stand it." Garrett nodded, empathizing. "I felt that way too. After Emily passed, I tried to do everything for the farm, for her memory, but a part of me lost the will to dream. It was all survival." They locked eyes, and in that moment, a bond of shared understanding formed. Grief had shaped them both, yet it was also the wellspring of their newfound determination. Gradually, the barn began to transform. String lights were hung more permanently. A long banquet table replaced the rickety folding one, and local craftspeople came in to lend a rustic charm. Think hand-stitched quilts as on decorative wall hangings, wooden centerpieces crafted from fallen branches. Every detail spoke of authenticity. One evening, when the last nail was hammered and the new kitchen counters were installed, Garrett stepped outside with Andrea. The sun dipped below the horizon in a blaze of pink and orange. Together, they surveyed the barn that was swiftly becoming a beacon of hope. Andrea slipped her arm through his, resting her head lightly on his shoulder. Garrett's heart thudded in his chest, but he didn't shy away. They stood in comfortable silence, absorbing the promise of what they had built. Paragraph 14, 550 words. The morning of the showcase dinner arrived with crisp, cool air and the sparkle of dew on newly cut grass. Though the event was scheduled for that evening, preparation had been underway for days. A portable freezer truck arrived to store fresh produce and meats. Old acquaintances of Andrea's from the culinary world began trickling in: sous chefs, bartenders, and a couple of marketing folks she trusted. Garrett watched them with a mix of nerves and gratitude. Andrea, in the farmhouse kitchen, orchestrated it all with calm precision, delegating tasks to her team. She had designed the menu to honor local flavors, stuffed peppers with goat cheese, pan-seared chicken with rosemary harvested from just outside the cabin, heirloom tomato soup garnished with fresh basil, and an apple honey tart for dessert using the orchard's final yield of the season. As the sun dipped, cars started rolling onto the makeshift parking area by the barn. People from all walks of life arrived: regional journalists, local influencers, a few potential investors who walked with the confidence of checking out a prime investment. One man in a tailored suit introduced himself as Michael Barnes, a representative of a major hospitality group. Another was Janice Reeves, rumored to invest in sustainable food ventures. Garrett felt dwarfed by their polished manner, but Andrea calmly introduced him as the heart of Dawson Farm and made sure they got the story: a farmer fighting to preserve a family legacy and a chef reconnecting with her passion. While the guests mingled with glasses of sweet tea and a signature local wine, the barn glowed with the ambiance of soft strings of lights. Wooden tables were set with linen napkins and simple yet elegant centerpieces of wildflowers. Helen, dressed in her best Sunday outfit, greeted arrivals with a motherly warmth. In the background, gentle acoustic guitar music played courtesy of a neighbor's teenage son who was thrilled by the opportunity. Finally, Andrea emerged from the makeshift kitchen wearing a simple chef's apron. She raised a hand for a bit of attention and welcomed everyone. Tonight, we gather to celebrate honest food and the land it comes from. This meal is a collaboration between Dawson Farm and the local community. We hope it reminds us all that food isn't just about filling our bellies, but also our hearts. The first course arrived, served by volunteer waitstaff. Low murmurs of appreciation rippled through the crowd as they tasted the roasted vegetable bruschetta. A small group of journalists snapped photos. But the atmosphere remained calm and communal. No bright camera lights, no frantic pace, just the soft hush of contentment. Garrett stood off to one side, watching it all, his heart pounding with emotion. If this worked, if an investor saw the potential and wrote a check, they might just save the farm. Between courses, Andrea found him. "How are you holding up?" she asked, resting a hand on his shoulder. He swallowed, adrenaline making him uncharacteristically jittery. "I'm good, just praying someone here decides to fund us." Her lips curled into a soft smile. "I have a feeling they will. But even if they don't, we did something beautiful tonight. That matters too." Looking into her eyes, Garrett felt a swell of gratitude and something deeper. It struck him that he didn't just want to save the farm, he wanted a future where Andrea was part of it, part of him, somehow. Paragraph 15, 560 words. Dinner climaxed with the apple honey tart, served warm from the oven and topped with whipped cream that Andrea whipped by hand, determined to keep everything as close to home style as possible. Applause reverberated through the barn as she and her small team took a short bow. The gathering then eased into conversation and strolls around the property, with some guests drifting out to admire the moonlit fields. Michael Barnes, the hospitality group representative, soon cornered Garrett. "Mr. Dawson, I must say, this is quite the experience. Andrea's name has drawing power, but what really impresses me is how genuine it all feels. Are you planning more events like this?" Garrett cleared his throat. "That's the idea: regular dinners, maybe cooking workshops. Eventually, we want to supply produce to restaurants, maybe even develop a small line of Dawson Farm products. Of course, we need capital for barn renovations. Irrigation updates?" Barnes nodded, glancing around at the glowing lights and the contented guests. "We might be interested. Let's talk soon." Similar conversations happened with Janice Reeves and a few other potential backers. Each time, Garrett felt an odd blend of excitement and disbelief. For so long, he'd been certain he'd lose the farm. Now, multiple doors opened at once. Meanwhile, Andrea walked the perimeter of the barn with a cup of herbal tea, reflecting on everything that had brought her to this point. She remembered days in a bustling city, endless TV shoots, the wave of exhaustion that had driven her to abandon it all. Here, she found her steps lighter. This dinner had validated her belief that food could be real, honest, and healing. She glanced up at the sky and whispered a silent thanks for the chance to rediscover what mattered. Eventually, the guests trickled out, offering warm congratulations and exchanging business cards. Once the last car departed, the barn sat quiet under the pale moonlight. Helen headed home to rest, leaving Garrett and Andrea alone to tidy up. They moved among the tables, picking up stray cups and wiping surfaces in a comfortable hush. At one point, Garrett paused mid-cleanup, finding Andrea stacking plates by the refurbished wooden counter. He approached, hesitated, then gently touched her elbow. She turned, meeting his gaze. In the dim barn light, her eyes shone with tears not of sadness, but of awe and relief. "We did it," he murmured, voice wavering slightly. "No matter what happens with the investors, we did something real tonight." Andrea nodded. "Garrett, I..." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. He caught her in a moment of quiet closeness, placing a tentative hand on her cheek. She didn't pull away. Time seemed to slow as Garrett leaned in, pressing his lips softly against hers. The kiss was gentle, filled with the lingering warmth of a night spent building something meaningful. When they broke apart, Andrea exhaled, a soft laugh breaking the tension. "You have no idea how much this place, this moment, means to me," she whispered. Garrett's chest tightened with emotion. "I think I do," he replied. Then he led her out into the open air, where they stood side by side, the barn glowing behind them. In that silent scene, beneath a canopy of stars, they both felt a sense of profound belonging for Andrea, to a farm that welcomed her battered spirit, for Garrett, to a new chapter in a legacy that had once seemed doomed to end. A week later, the bank's phone call confirmed it. An investor from the showcase dinner had agreed to fund the farm's transformation. The foreclosure was halted. And as Garrett hung up that call, he found Andrea waiting in the doorway, her eyes brimming with tears of joy. He took her hands in his, the unspoken truth hanging between them together. They had found a life recipe no camera crew could ever manufacture, a recipe for healing, renewal, and the kind of hope that forever changes two wandering hearts. In the end, the smoke cleared, but scars remained etched into both the land and the hearts that endured. Lives were changed not just by fire and loss, but by moments of quiet courage and unexpected compassion. The fields, once a battleground of desperation, now whispered new promises beneath a sky softened by time and forgiveness. Yet nothing came free. Every choice carried its cost, each victory tempered by sacrifice, each truth revealed at the expense of another. What began in flames ended in reflection, a reminder that the harshest journeys can forge the strongest bonds, and that sometimes the greatest courage is simply letting go. This land, forever marked by struggle and resilience, had taught them the hardest lesson of all. Rebuilding requires more than just wood and stone. It demands faith in the unseen, trust in a stranger's kindness, and the strength to find hope after everything you love has turned to ash. As the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the valley in hues of amber and gold, the wind carried one last whisper through the fields, an invitation to us all. What would you do if everything you knew turned to ashes? Could you forgive? Could you rebuild? Or would you let the past define your future?